Do another installment of the Django-CMS series of videos that I've been doing. It's been a little while since I've done one, and as many of you know, I do also host a monthly show and tell on the Google Hangouts. And one of the topics we covered in the last, well, the primary topic we covered in the very last show and tell was about personalization and segmentation. And I promised some of the people in the community that I would also do a screencast on the topic, and here it is. So what is personalization and segmentation in the CMS world? Well, what that basically means is a capability for your CMS to allow you to personalize the content for individual visitors or for segments of visitors. So let's say, actually, probably the best thing to do is show you an example. So I have opened up Amazon.com. I haven't even logged into Amazon, but I have previously on this computer, so there's probably a cookie. There's definitely a cookie, and even before doing anything else at Amazon, I am already getting a personalized experience. And you can see very quickly I have, it's personalized with my name. We see it over here as well. More than that, we see that some of the content on the page has been sponsored, has been changed specifically for me. So, it's difficult for me to know offhand how much of this stuff is just for me versus for everybody. But I do know that if you go down here, you see new for you, and here's some recommendations they make based on previous purchases. So, yes, I used to do some trading, and apparently I bought a book on options, and so it's recommending me a new book by Sheldon Nattenberg. Here we see the new Pink Floyd, a track from the new Pink Floyd album is being shown to me here. And if you click on Why Recommended, it's going to pull up this little window here, and it shows me that since I purchased other albums by Pink Floyd, it's recommending that I get this particular track. Now, this may actually be a little bit of a segmentation fail or personalization fail, because I think anybody who buys anything from Pink Floyd, they're going to want to buy the whole album or nothing at all. So, nonetheless, you can see how their engine works, and in this case, it's working pretty good. Now, I actually already purchased this album, so I'm not going to buy this track. But anyway, this is a really good example of personalization and segmentation. Now, what's the difference between the two words? So, personalization, I think, is about personalizing for an individual. So things like, having my name. Now, if it said, I would definitely say this is personalization, especially if it had my full name here, because it's really about me rather than people like me. Whereas segments are about people like me. So down here, when we looked at the Pink Floyd recommendation, it's basically suggesting a Pink Floyd sale to people like me who purchased other Pink Floyd music. And you could call people who purchase Pink Floyd music as a segment of their market, and this is content specific for that segment of people. Now, I think to be fully accurate, I think you should really call this personalization, because it's not about just people who purchased any Pink Floyd. I mean, they have my buying history, and they did look at my specific details. But imagine that, most sites don't have this level of detail about their customers, and maybe that's a good thing. But, you do have some information about your customers when they arrive at your site already, right? Things like what browser they use. Maybe you'd want to personalize content based on that. And if you were a browser manufacturer and you were going to sell a browser or maybe offer a browser to somebody, then that might be a good way to segment your customers. Not everybody's going to use browser information to segment their customers and create personalized content for them. But there are other things, even on a naked request, that you could use. Things like what IP address are they on? So that might be very useful if you maybe were selling to a specific corporation and they had a particular subnet that you wanted to target. Then maybe that kind of information might be useful to you for targeting some of your customers. I think that's probably not a very viable case for most uses, but nonetheless, it is an example of segmentation. Um, some better examples is to maybe use that IP address to figure out what country they're from, and offer anybody from a particular country specific content tailored to that country. And now I think that's a lot more meaningful for most businesses who operate in multiple countries, because even if they operate in multiple countries, they probably have a legal entity in each of those countries, and they probably have different laws and regulations they have to abide by when they're making sales. For example, maybe they have a contest in one market, but maybe that sort of contest is illegal in other markets. Not nefarious illegal, but just maybe they have to operate the contest differently in different places. So there's some really good use cases for using country level information, and you could even look at things like sub-country level. So what state of the United States are they in, or what country, what region of the country are they in? If you're a French retailer, you might have special deals for people in in Paris, whereas maybe you wouldn't if they were in another part of the country. I don't know. Anyway, so country information might be useful. So anyway, that's getting into the details a little bit, but that's kind of the thing that we want to talk about today is personalization and segmentation in the Django CMS environment. Now, a lot of the other CMSs that are out there have solutions for segmentation and personalization already, and I would argue that so does Django CMS, by the very nature that it is sitting on top of a very powerful web platform of Django. Django can do all of this stuff. Now, is it built in? Yes, actually it is. Is it user friendly? Maybe not, right? Maybe you want to have a CMS like Django CMS to offer up some segmentation capabilities to non-technical content operators, and that may be the perfect use case for why we would need to have something more specialized for Django CMS. So let's show you what we have today. Basically, there are two projects that I'm going to show you. I'm the author of both of them so far. We have a little bit of support from some others. But both of these were created for Aldrin. If you're not familiar with Aldrin, it's a hosted Django CMS platform by Divio, and I encourage you to check it out. So the first project that we're going to talk about, well, they're really closely related, is, they're the same one, is Aldrin Segmentation. And this is the core plugin that you're going to need to install. If you're going to install it, I recommend that you go to the develop branch. There's some stuff I've added very recently, in particular a cookie plugin that I'm going to show you. And then if you're interested in country level types of segmentation, you might want to check out this project, Aldrin Country Segment, and I'm going to show you what both of these do now. So here's the project that we've been using throughout this whole video series. The front page has changed because I'm using it as a place to show you all of this stuff, but the other tabs are largely the same. I'm not going to click them right now for reasons which will become apparent, but I'm not here to talk about how these things are made. If you are interested in any of the content that you're going to see on the site, you can find it in one of the previous videos, because we started this whole series with basically a plain Jane Django CMS installer install of the CMS, and everything that is built here was built basically on a screencast. So check those things out if you see anything interesting. So let's get into this. So here we are, and we have our regular site. Again, I've changed the content on the front. It's just a bunch of garbage text. The styling is still very poor. I haven't spent any time on styling anything. And let's log in to edit some of the content. I'm going to go ahead and supply my credentials. And we've now logged in, and all of you who are using Django CMS will see nothing out of the ordinary here. However, you might have noticed that this text right here has changed. When I was not logged in, it said welcome to our site, and now that I'm logged in, it says we love our registered users. So what's going on there? Well, we'll look at that in a minute. And you might also notice that there's a new menu up here in the toolbar called Segments. And inside of this menu are going to be some of the plugins, which I'm going to be talking about. They basically register themselves into the segment system. And once they do, and once you instantiate or create a segment using one of the plugins, then they will be up here. And the reason they're up here is because if you're a content manager or an operator of a django-CMS site, and you create segments, so let's say I create a segment that says, show me, or maybe it's a special bit of content just for people from France. Well, if you're not physically located in France, then you're not going to be able to use the CMS except to see and preview what French people would see, right? So we need a way to override the segments. And by the way, also, what if you're not in France and you want to see what the content you're creating for people in France would look like? Well, then you could use the override to turn that particular segment on, and it would show you. So I'm going to give you an example. So again, this part right here, we love our registered users, is currently being shown because I'm logged in, and that's because I'm using a segment plugin called Segment by Auth. And basically it's a modeless cookie. There's no configuration options except maybe a label. And basically it will only trigger that content if the user currently looking at the page is authenticated. So naturally, since I just logged in, I am authenticated, and so I see that content. But if I want to see what the content looks like as a non-registered user or someone who hasn't logged in, then I can force inactive, and I'm going to do that now. So once the page refreshes, you'll see we're now back to welcome to our site, which is the generic content or content for non-registered users. And you'll also see that the toolbar up here has changed. Segments now has a little 1 next to it, and that's telling me that there is an override in play. And if I want to know what's being overridden, I just click that, and then it shows me, by virtue of highlighting this in bold, I know that it has something to do with the segment by auth, and then I can go and see that it's the is authenticated rule, and I can see, oh yes, it is overridden to be inactive. Well, if I want to clear that, there's 2 ways. One is I can click it again and it will clear it. So now I'm back to the native state, which is showing authenticated users content. The other way I could do it is by going to this reset down here, and I'm going to go ahead and set the override again, and then I'm just going to show you can reset all segments, and that will just turn off any overrides so that you can start over. Okay, so let's look at some of these other plugins. So we also have the ability to segment by the presence of a cookie. So if you have if your user has a cookie, in this case the cookie name is first interest, and if that cookie has a value of about, then let's see what that will do. I'm going to click on Force to Active so I can see what it will look like if I have that cookie. And we see that it will show, okay, so it says, okay, maybe this person really likes what's on the About page the last time they were here, maybe, and so maybe we can entice them to go read about us again on the About page. So we would display this content here. Well, there's some other ones here that I've got set up already, so we could do, let's clear that override, and then we'll go see what if their first interest was really leadership. What are we gonna see there? So here we would see a different message, which is be sure to check out the latest leadership updates. Okay, so you get the idea. Basically, I've created for each of these 4 tabs here a value on that cookie, which when the user then comes back to the home page or comes on a subsequent visit, then they'll see this extra bit of personalized content, basically inviting them to go and read that content again. And it works. So look, I'm currently overriding this, and that's why it works. But let me show you, here I am without any cookie. I'm going to go ahead and show you the cookies for this. We have nothing in here about first interest, right? So now as a user, I'm going to go ahead and click on, let's say I'll click on news. So we go there and we see we now have a first interest news cookie, right? So first interest cookie, which now has the value of news. And so when I subsequently go back to the front page, we see this personalized content here. And it will remain that way forever until either the cookie expires, which will be, I think, in 1 year, or we change, whatever. So I'm just going to go ahead and clear this. Well, it doesn't matter actually. I'll leave it on. So so there you go. That shows you the segment by cookie plugin. And by the way, in order to ease development in this area, I'll show you what we've done here. Is I'm going to go into structure mode, and you can see there's a set cookie plugin, and you can add that to a placeholder. It doesn't have any visual appearance. It basically just emits enough JavaScript to set the cookie. But if you double click the cookie and go to the change form, you can see you have some options here, and I try to make it clever enough that you can either type all this stuff manually, or you can say, or look at the existing segments and use one of them, right? So basically this will read the configuration out of one of the segment plugins and allow you to set the cookie accordingly. Basically it will copy this to here and this to here. You can set the expiration, you can set the path, which makes sense for you. Currently we're on the leadership page, so you can set it to any of the segments in the path. And you can override existing. We don't want to do that for this case. But anyway, so that's the set cookie plugin. It might be useful for other purposes too. It was surprisingly complicated to create. It's not a straightforward plugin, amazingly, but nonetheless, it does work, and it's great for this purpose. So anyway, let's go back to the front page. I'm going to show you how these segments are constructed. So I'm going to go to structure mode, and we can see a couple things right off the bat. First of all, these multi-columns down here, these are regular. These are from, I think, the multi-column, or maybe it's the grid plugin, I forget which, but nonetheless it's nothing to do with what we're talking about today, and it's just where I have some generic content. All the segmented or personalized content is up here, and the way you would create a bit of segmented content is first you have to define a limit block. And so here we are. This is the one, you remember we're showing we love our registered users, or if you're not logged in, it just shows welcome to our site. So we're looking at that particular configuration now, and you can see there's a couple things in here. I'm going to expand this all the way. We have the limit block, which says show first. So basically what this does, and you can set it to any number, right? But I swear 99% of the time you're gonna leave this on 1. There may be under rare circumstances where you want to set this to a different number, but most of the time just leave this at 1. And you can set a label if you like, but it's not required. So what this does, the limit block, is it says, okay, I'm going to show the first of my children in order, going down the list, of which there are 2 children, this one and this one, and I'm going to show the first one that is a valid segment. Okay, now only segment plugins will be valid or not, but it's smart enough to say, well, if it's a regular non-segment plugin, then it counts always as valid, right? So basically that allows this plugin to act as a fallback. So if this particular plugin says I'm not valid, please don't show me, then this show first will fall back and show this one first. So that's why this is here, and that's why when we're not authenticated we see welcome to our site on the front page rather than the message that we have for authenticated users. Okay, so that covers the limit block, and basically it just to recap, it just sequentially goes through the children and finds the first one that matches. In this case, the first one. If you had put 2 here for the limit block, then it would find the first 2 that match and would display those content, their content. But like I said, most of the time you're going to keep it at 1. So the segment by auth. Now this, yeah. So this is a segment plugin, and basically, I'm going to double click it so you can see the configuration. Again, like I said earlier, it doesn't really have any kind of configuration other than a label. And if you include a label, it will show that instead of the configuration, which you see. Here's the label, and then here's the configuration in brackets. If you didn't have a label, it would just show just is authenticated. And whatever you put inside of here is what will show if this rule passes. So in this case, I am authenticated, and so it shows we love our registered users, and we can verify that just by simply looking here. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Another limit block, again, show first. As I said, most of the time it will only be, you'll set it to 1. Now I have two different plugins, segment plugins at play here, and I have no fallback. So that means if none of these match, it's just not going to show anything. And that's basically what happens when I have no cookie. It just doesn't show anything here. But when I do have a cookie, then it will show, in this case, a link to the latest news. So what's happening here? So we have segment by switch. Now this is kind of a degenerate segment. Now this segment by switch is, it doesn't actually, it's not sensitive to anything on a per request basis. And this was largely used when I was doing development of everything, but it might have other uses as well. So if you have content which you just need to switch on for maybe a small period of time and then switch it off later without having to rebuild the whole tree of content on your page, or maybe it's something that you periodically will show and then want to turn off again, so you don't really want to rebuild it every time, then this might be a good plugin to use, although it wouldn't really be segmentation. And to be honest, a switch doesn't really make it segment. It's not personalization because it's not sensitive in any way to the incoming request. Everybody will see the same thing based on what you select here, always on or always off. Now, this particular one I'm going to leave off because if I turn this on, then none of the other ones will even be evaluated. And so therefore all of my cookie sensitive segments will never do their job. So I do have that off, and and by the way, I'm going to switch to the content view again. Product gallery, if you might remember, is actually a app hook. It's not a standard CMS page. So I didn't have any placeholders available to me to use the set cookie plugin. So that's why I didn't include an option here for, I didn't include an option in here for first interest equals products because I wasn't able to set the cookie at this time. So if I was doing this site for real, I would probably just add a placeholder and then use the cookie, or since it's an app hook, I could just add it to the request that first interest equals product, and I'd be done. I wouldn't have to use a plugin. But I just, just for demonstrations, it didn't seem important. So that's the segment by switch, and that's why I had it set to products. I mean, that way I could just turn it on and off at will. So that brings us to the next one. And remember, these are going to be evaluated in order. The first time it finds one that matches, it will stop evaluating. And we're only going to show the first one that evaluates. This one does not evaluate by definition because it's switched off. Our cookie does not equal leadership, it equals news. So this one will not evaluate. But you can see, if we want to look at the cookie segment UI, we can see what you do is you can provide a label. And you set the name of the cookie and you set the value to consider. So in this case, we're looking for the word leadership inside the cookie of first interest. As we said before, we don't have a cookie with that value, so this one failed. The next one, however, passes. So it's basically the same thing as all cookie segments are. You have first interest is the name of the cookie, and then news. And in this case, we do have a cookie named first interest, and it has a value of news. So this is the content that will be displayed right here. And as you saw on the front page, it's read up on our latest news, right? And that's what we saw. So if I switch back over to content view, we see this content. So that's how that works, okay? And if this didn't pass, then we could check the about page, and then we could check the contact page. and again, it would show specialized content for those people who visited those pages first, and if none of this occurred, then it would show nothing here. Okay, so let's go to this one. This one is using the second project, which is the Aldrin country segment. And just so you'll know, the way this works is we're using the MaxMind GeoIP database, and this was kind of designed for Aldrin, and there's some special provisions in it for that, but I've tried to make it as flexible as possible and to work in non-Aldrin environments. Basically what it does is it sets up the GeoIP database, and then there's some middleware that on every request it will look at the IP address, incoming IP address, it will look it up in its flat file database, and then return a country, and it's pretty fast. It doesn't really add that much overhead. Now if you had hundreds of thousands of hits per minute, then maybe that would be a big concern, but in my practice, in my usage, this is pretty fast. One thing that all of this segmentation, by the way, it will impact your architecture of your project, because you really can't use heavy caching of the content, right? In some projects, while all the content is basically static, you just cache it all, and it's super fast. You can serve 800 pages per second, even on a single core machine. But whenever you're doing any personalization or segmentation, you have to be, changing the content on a per user basis. So you have to think about your caching strategy, and probably do some things like varies on caching, or other strategies. The whole gamut is available to you. Anyway, so here we are. We're looking at segmenting by country. I have two set up here. Normally we don't show anything here, and to be honest, I'm not physically in France or the UK. So let's see what would happen if I was. So if I was, what I can do again as an operator, I can go and set an override here. So I can do, let's say I'm going to be in France right now. So now we see that our French customers get minus 25% off their price of whatever this company fictitiously is selling. That would be only for people who are thought to be physically located in France. And that means you can offer a discount to people in France, and your customers in other countries won't be seeing this and feeling left out, right? 99% of the time, the GeoIP is pretty accurate, especially if you keep it up to date. And so you're not going to be alienating your customers with special offers just for one country or another. So that's another great use for personalization and segmentation. But let's say I was in the United Kingdom. So again, in my fictitious company, I have an office set up in Paris, and I have another office set up in London, and they're separate legal entities, and they basically have different management teams, so they could actually offer different things to their markets. They have a lot of autonomy, let's say. So let's see, if I'm in the United Kingdom, and we're going to see what our content looks like for them. Okay, so they don't have the same minus 25, but they have free shipping this week, right? So again, we can offer a deal here in the United Kingdom. Now they have a pretty good postal system, and it's pretty cheap, reasonably. So our company was able to offer this special deal to them. So I think this this country one probably demonstrates segmentation really well. I don't know why this is. I don't remember making any changes, but anyway. So that's how segmentation works. I don't have many other. I mean, we have the is authenticated. We have the cookie. We have the country. I had another one which I showed you, which is a switch, and it doesn't make sense to override switch because it's always either on or off, whatever you set it to, and so it doesn't appear in this menu. We don't have many other segment rules available yet, but I'm really hoping that some of you will get excited about this technology, this capability. Technology is a bit of a strong word, but this capability, and want to contribute and create more rule sets. I think, this is basically pre-version 1. It works. I think that to make this a really, really good solution, I think we need to do more than have individual rules like, country or cookie or off. Well, we need those, but I think it would be better if we had a single plugin which allows you to mix and match different rules. So imagine instead of having content based only on cookie or country or off, you could have one plugin where you can configure many rules. You could say, they're in this set of countries instead of a single one, or they have this cookie which has, um, a variety of values, or maybe there's a regex support or whatever, and you can create more complex rules that work together to define your segments a lot more meaningfully to the marketing department, rather than has a specific cookie or has a specific country. And I think there's a lot of other rules that we could implement pretty quickly. I'm just going to mention a few that we talked about in the meeting yesterday, the day before yesterday. So, I could see us having one that's sensitive to the incoming IP address, right? And or a subnet of IP addresses. This might be complicated a little bit with the onset of v6 IPs, but I think there still might be a use case for that, so that would be kind of useful. Landing page. So, well, before I talk about landing page, let's talk about session data. So currently we have a plugin that's sensitive to cookies, but if we can do this, then we can certainly do sessions. And we just don't have a plugin for it yet, and I'm hoping that either I'll get the incentive to build one or somebody else will. Django has fantastic support for sessions, which is basically cookies that are stored on the server instead of on the client's device. Currently, if we did everything with cookies, then the user will end up with 27 different cookies representing different states for you to personalize with. And the right way to do it is to have one cookie, which is the session ID, and that we read everything that we need to out of the session data. Now, of course, that's what Amazon are doing, right? So, like I said, I haven't logged into this, not in a long time, and because I have a cookie, it looks me up in their session store and says, here's Martin's profile, and personalizes the content accordingly. So it's definitely the right way to do it. So I think we need to have a session thing up here, a session plugin for segments. Once we have that, then there's a whole lot of things we can do. So imagine that we had one that would be sensitive to the landing page. So where in the system did I first arrive at the site? So imagine that I'm running a big Google Ads campaign for a specific product, and I've set up a special landing page here in my CMS that is not really in the normal navigation, but it is a legitimate page, and it has a special URL, and when people click on the ad on my AdWords campaign, they will end up at that page, and that's the definition of a landing page, right? So once I get there, I can give them a targeted sell on whatever product it is that I'm selling that day, and I can also store that state. Arrived at the site via this landing page could be a session variable, and when they come back later, maybe they come back a week later, and I know that because they clicked on that AdWords campaign and they ended up at that landing page, that they're interested in whatever widget I was selling that day. So maybe I put some of that content on the front page to try to capture their return interest, right? So maybe they looked at it, they decided it was too expensive for them, but they came back. So maybe they're interested in buying today, or maybe it wasn't about price. Maybe they had to go and get authorization from their manager to buy the widget, and now they're back to make the sale. And we can help them out by putting some content on the front page to direct them right to that product, or maybe we can try to upsell them. It's up to you. Now, I would say be careful if you're going to do any of that, just because I know there was a story about 3 or 4 years ago about one of the low-cost airlines, I think based in Ireland, I'm not sure, that were using that kind of capability to actually raise prices on flights for customers who were fitting that exact profile I just described. They would come, they would look at the price, say it was 99 pounds or euros or whatever, and they come back a week later ready to make that purchase, and the price has been raised to 129 euros. So they got caught, though, because people figured out that it was, if they didn't have the cookie that ended up on their system and they started a fresh browsing session, they ended up getting a cheaper price. So they kind of got caught with that. And I don't know if it's legal or not to do that, but I definitely think it's not cool. So be careful with how you use this technology. You don't want to piss off your customers. Anyway, so there's some other things we could do. If your site or project uses account logins, well, any of the data that you have available to you in that account should be made available to you in a segment plugin. So, I could see one where, everybody who hasn't been to the site in the last 90 days might get different content than people who were here yesterday, just for example, based on the data you're storing about your visitors in their accounts. Some other, probably more simpler ones to create would be something based on a referral URL. So, again, what if we're doing a big ad campaign and, people that come into the site from a specific place where we're doing our advertising could also trigger a segment and could trigger different content. So that's one that could be probably quickly written. Search terms. So let's say, you go to Google and you type in, fantastic widgets, and you end up on our site. Wouldn't you like to know that and provide specific content for people who found your site through a search engine? I think that's very powerful. You can, help to move your customer down the sales funnel based on how they arrived at your site. And so this is kind of about referrals and search terms and landing pages. I think all of those are very related. Other non-segmented, well, I don't know, maybe you could still call it segmenting, but time of day. Suppose you're a restaurant and you have normal cuisine and you maybe have a nice breakfast menu and you have a good lunch menu, but at night maybe you have a different menu altogether and you have a dance floor and you have a DJ, right? So maybe you have a completely different set of content that you want to show in your locality when it gets to be 9 o'clock. So, if it's not yet 9 o'clock in the evening, maybe you show stuff about your lunch menu and your breakfast menu. But after 9 o'clock, maybe you start showing a little bit about your nightlife, right, at your club. Just an example. It could be also maybe the day of the week. So again, maybe you have content which regularly should be different on the weekends versus the weekdays. And you don't really want to, have to go to your site every week and reconfigure it to show that different content. You could use this capability here with I think, a pretty quick to write time of day or day of week plugin to turn on and off content based on the day of the week or the time of the day. I think that would be an easy plugin to write. Now, let me show you a little bit about a little bit of the code and show you how easy it is. I'm assuming many of you are indeed developers, and I'd like to show you a little bit about some of the code to create some of these. Now, this is actually the wrong code. Let me see if I can find. Okay, this should do it. Alrighty, so let me just make this Windows fit properly. Should have been ready, sorry. So this is basically the code for both of those plugins, the segmentation and the the country segment. What I want to show you here is not the whole thing necessarily. It's not rocket science, this thing, but the thing I want to show you is that we've made it easy for people to add new plugins. So what do I want to show you? Cms Plugins. Okay, so basically we've created a base class. It's an abstract base class that provides most of the things that you're going to need for a segment plugin. There's only two things you have to really worry about. when you're writing a new one in the plugin side of things, and that is you have to create a get segment override, although it says this should not be overridden, so this probably shouldn't be touched. Sorry, there's only one thing you really have to do, and that is this is where you process the rule. So you say, is context appropriate? That's going to be your method. You're going to get the context, you're going to get the instance, and you simply return true if, based on the content of context and instance, you determine that it is appropriate for this content to be shown, then you return true. If you don't, then you return false. It's that simple. So just for example, let's look at, let me show you, yeah, well, I'll just do the cookie one. Where is it? Segment. Okay, they're all in here. So most of the cookies are in here, and you can see how small they are. So this is fallback. So this is actually meant to be a fallback case, and it turned out it was really not very useful, but somebody might make sense of it. You would want to use this, by the way, the fallback segment, if you had a number of things that you wanted to show as a fallback condition instead of just one thing. So in all my examples, the fallback was always a single plugin, in this case a text plugin. But what if you had a collection of things you wanted to show in a fallback? Well, then you'd put them all in this, and it would wrap them, and it would satisfy, and you can see it will always return true. The other way to do it is you could use a switch plugin, which is right here, and you could set it to on, right? So in this case, we're overriding is context appropriate. This is the switch segment. Is context appropriate, and if the user has set the switch to on, then it will return that, and if you set it to off, it will return that. In both cases, the right thing will happen. So the cookie segment's a little bit different. In this case, we're going to get the request object out of the context. Super easy to do. And then we look at the value of, well, we get the cookie, which is given the name that we put in our preferences or our settings for the plugin, and we check to see if it has the value, right? This is a very straightforward implementation. Like I said earlier, I think it probably should use regex, or at least have things like begins with, contains, ends with. I think it would be really easy to make this better, and as soon as I have the need for that to be better, I certainly will. But in the meantime, if somebody else wants to jump in, that's great too. Authenticated. This is the authenticated segment. Basically, I'm just saying, if I'm going to get the request object again and check and see if the user is authenticated, and if that's the case, then they get to see the content. So it's super easy. You can see these are real simple. Now, when you're writing any plugins for the CMS, there's actually two things you have to do. One is to write the plugin, and the other one you have to create the model. So here's the models for these things. Before I show you the models for the actual concrete implementations, I'm going to show you we also have a base class for this as well, an abstract base class, and I guess that would be in here. Yeah, segment-based plugin model. So again, there's some bits in here which you're going to have to do, but it's done it for you most of the time. So the only thing that you really have to worry about so much is this configuration string. Now there's a lot of comments in here. Basically, when you have, let me switch back to the UI. So when you have this menu here, this is the configuration string, right? Is authenticated. First interest equals about. First interest equals contact. France. Okay, so these are the configuration strings, and they're meant to be short and sweet because they need to fit in this menu. Otherwise, you won't really know what you're going to be overriding. So that's what this is all about. Let's look at that again. It's kind of like just implementing a double underscore str double underscore or Unicode, but as you have to be a little bit we have to be a little bit smarter about it, and that is because the use of this configuration string, it needs to be stored in the segment pool in an untranslated state, right? So that if you have operators who are, you could have two different operators operating on this at the exact same time. One of them has their settings, if they go to user settings, and they can set their language for the the operator UI to French, right? And if they do, we'll want to see this stuff in French. And unless we store this string here in a special way, it won't be translatable. So, the the first thing you're going to want to think to do is just make it a lazy, you get text lazy string, and that's what I first tried. Unfortunately, because of the way the thing works, we have to go one step deeper. So at the end of the day, what we have to do is you have to basically create a promise to return a lazy translation string, as opposed to just returning a lazy translation string. So it's just one little extra step you have to do, but it's not hard. I'm going to show you an implementation of that in a minute. And then down here, you just have to implement, str. It's basically using the same string up here that we use, but we actually force it to be text, so we don't care for this purpose if it's wrapped in a promise and a lazy string. So let's look at one of the implementations. Here's the cookie segment implementation. Again, it's pretty simple. We just have declared our two fields, and then of course we've declared our override of configuration string as I just described. And here you can see we're grabbing the configuration, or we're creating our configuration string, right? And then we basically wrap that into a promise using the functional tool lazy. So basically this is creating a promise around this text, and it returns it, and that's how it magically works. If you don't do this, it's okay, it won't break, but you won't be able to get translations in the segment toolbar menu. So that's pretty much it. I'm hoping that some people will like to come in here and create some new segments, and maybe create, like I said earlier, a larger kind of way of managing segments. So you have kind of maybe drag and drop interface for creating multiple rules together to define one marketing segment. We're not there yet. Hopefully we'll be there soon. So anyway, I hope this was an informative talk for all of you. I know this is a lot more technical than I usually get, and on two different fronts. One of them is on CMS marketing type terminology, is a little bit more technical, talking about segments and personalization, and also I'm actually showing you the implementation details of a specific plugin, because I'm really hoping you guys will feel empowered to go out and contribute to this, I think, sorely needed capability in django-CMS, and I'm very pleased that it is here. And a special shout out to Divio for asking me to create this, and in fact compensating me for making it, and then also, out of the goodness of their hearts, releasing this work into the public domain, open sourcing it. So anyway, I hope that was informative, and I really hope that you guys enjoy it and contribute. See you next time.